Wow, that was a very powerful dance by the South African ballet dancer Kitty Fetla in the nearly empty Te Waterskloof Dam on the Western Cape in South Africa, which I think is a great way to start this Water Wednesday webinar on drought in South Africa. So hello everyone, and welcome to this month's Water Wednesday webinar hosted by Bauseat. And whether or not you've tuned in before, I will be a new face for you. My name is Eric Karstens, and I'm the new program manager here at Bauseat Ocean Awareness Programs. I have been an ocean lover for my entire life, and I'm so grateful to now be working with an organization that focuses so deeply on ocean engagement through art. And this webinar is in conjunction with our 10th annual Ocean Awareness Contest. Yay for 10 years. We invite young people ages 11 to 18 from around the world to create visual art, spoken word, poetry, creative writing, film, music, dance, and multimedia submissions about our blue planet. And we offer prizes of up to $1,500 awarded in the contest. And we have some new awards like the Voice of the Sea Award for spoken word submissions. So if you submit a spoken word piece to the Ocean Awareness Contest, you'll automatically be considered for the Voice of the Sea Award. And you can find other awards for US and Massachusetts participants outlined on our website, which is bauseat.org/contest. This year, the theme is Water Rising. So we want to ask students to think about their connection to water and encourage them to think about how they can use art to make their voices heard to protect water, which is an invaluable resource for life on Earth. In this Water Wednesday webinar, we will be hearing from some very special guests about their connections to water. South Africa has been experiencing serious droughts and water shortages since 2015, and even before then. The teacher, artists, and sustainability student here tonight are going to share their experiences confronting the drought in South Africa and confronting climate change in their local communities. But before I introduce our guests, I want to give some brief background on climate change and explain kind of how it's intensifying drought. So this graphic here, which is from climatesignals.org, I think illustrates it well, that there are a lot of different things that are causing the climate or causing the drought in South Africa. But it all starts with greenhouse gas emissions. So humans are burning fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal, which release CO2 and other heat trapping gases into the atmosphere. And as their title may suggest, heat trapping gases are really excellent at trapping heat in the atmosphere. So we're seeing global temperatures rise as a result. And as the global temperature rises, so does the temperature of the surface of the Earth. And the soil on Earth naturally has some water and it has some moisture. But with these elevated temperatures, that water is evaporating faster, which is leaving the soil a lot drier and less suitable for farming, which is causing an agricultural crisis in South Africa. And some of our speakers will be able to speak a lot more on that, so I won't talk too much about it. South Africa also has reservoirs like the Te Waterskloof Dam, which was featured in the videos before, that supply water to the people who live on the Western Cape. And this water in the reservoir is evaporating a lot faster with this increased land surface temperature. And there's not rain to refill the reservoir, which is why we're seeing the water drop so much. And I'll talk a little bit about why we're not seeing rainfall as much. Air temperatures are also increasing as heat trapping gases fill the atmosphere, which can cause extreme heat and heat waves, which is a public health risk. It's dangerous to be outside during a heat wave. So both these land surface temperatures and these air surface temperatures are increasing the drought risk. There's also large scale air circulation changes that we're seeing. Now this is a little complicated, but I can give a broad overview on what's happening. And this graphic from Arizona State University illustrates it well. So at the equator here, the sun is hitting at a certain angle that heats up the air a lot. And there's two things to know about hot air. It rises and it holds a lot of moisture. So as the sun is heating up this air at the equator, it's rising and then it cools a little bit enough that it can't hold all that water anymore. So it starts to rain, and that's why it rains a lot in the tropics. So there's slightly cooler air up here now, and more hot air is rising, which pushes this cooled air to 30 degrees north and south of the equator. And as it goes, it continues to cool down and it continues to release water. And by the time it reaches 30 degrees north, it's very dry and cool. So it descends back on Earth, and then eventually will start to heat up, get more moisture, and then continue this cycle. And this is called a Hadley cell. And it explains why we see these bands of lush green forests around the equator, where there's a lot of rainfall, and then these dry subtropical areas 30 degrees north and south of the equator. Now the Western Cape of South Africa is right here around 34 degrees south of the equator. So it's already in a very dry area, but with climate change, these Hadley cells are expanding even further, which means this dry area here will get wider and move further south, which will put the Western Cape and a lot of South Africa even more in the middle of this dry area where there's not a lot of rain, which has contributed to the emptying reservoirs that we've seen. So with all of these changes, the warmer land temperatures, the warmer air temperatures, and the changes in air circulation, we've seen drought in South Africa since 2015. So I would like to pass it over now to some of our presenters. And I'd like to introduce our first guest, Marissa Maré, who is an art teacher at the Bridge House Independent School on the Western Cape of South Africa. Marissa has won Bauseat's Educator Innovation Award twice for her commitment to teaching about the current environmental crisis through art. At both the Red Hill School in Sandton and the Bridge House Independent School, Marissa has taken her students on creative journeys to not only consider their impacts on the planet, but to take steps to mitigate them. Thank you, Marissa, for joining us today and for your continued commitment to the environment. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Eric. Is my screen visible? Brilliant, thank you. Artist David Goldblatt's photograph is a stark reminder of water scarcity in South Africa. At best of times, water is scarce in our country, but drought, brought about by climate change and over-exploitation of water, is stretching the limits of this precious resource. I find this photograph moves my emotions and leaves me with questions. The dark clouds in the background give me a sense of hope that a sprinkle rain might fall on this dry area of the Karoo. But the sign in the foreground is quite foreboding. The sign is in fact an advertisement that attempts to promise relief for the farmers and communities living in this dry area. And it reads, "Boorgat is die antwoord." Directly translated, it means borehole water is the answer. Is borehole water from the aquifer a solution during a time of drought? And can this water be depleted too? Who has access to this water and how is it regulated? Who owns this water? How can we farm more sustainably? And who's the most vulnerable during this time of drought? And I think far more importantly than these questions is what can I do as an educator to educate people about drought in South Africa and their use of water. Researching the topic of drought in South Africa, I noticed that it is an ongoing and widespread issue, and it's not only confined to our recent drought experienced in Cape Town. I know it still haunts our memories, because imagine if all the municipal water in a city runs dry and every drop of water that you need per day had to be brought to your home as bottled water. For some people who live without the infrastructure of municipal water, fetching water is a daily reality. But for many, this situation is completely unimaginable. Cape Town, luckily, narrowly escaped day zero, the day that municipal water would run dry in the mother city. Imagine only having 50 liters of water per day for every single task that you have to do, whether it's showering or preparing food or feeding water to your pets. The Day Zero campaign allowed people to share their stories about how they conserved water, and it was a very successful campaign that allowed South Africans, specifically in the Western Cape, to stand together during this time of drought. There were many creative responses to the Cape Town water crisis, because it was obviously a major concern for everyone in the country. Artists, designers, engineers, and many others addressed the issue in creative, but also in pragmatic ways. The Rain Must Fall performance by ballet dancer Kitty Petler, which you saw in the beginning of the webinar, was a really powerful performance at the Theewaterskloof Dam, where she references African mythology and rain dancing traditions. A more pragmatic response is Tashi Piprek's work as an innovative civil engineer. He designed a waterless urinal system that also, believe it or not, harvests human urine that is then used as fertilizer. Now, would you eat food that is prepared or fertilized with human urine? His studies show that about 79% of his 500 survey respondents said that they would actually support that. When I shared this with my students the other day, they were very unsure about eating food that is prepared in that way. But it makes me think that our relationship with water is far more than just a functional relationship. Our relationship with water is complex, and we don't just rely on it for our physical needs, but it permeates everything about our culture and our beliefs. I find this image that went viral on social media incredibly moving. This is on the day that Cape Town received rain in March of 2018. And this man stopped in the middle of peak hour traffic on the highway, and he said a prayer of thanks and caused a major traffic jam. As an educator, I've experienced a drought as I traveled through our country and also as I participated in water collections. And I felt that I had to do something more tangible and practical to engage with climate change issues. The visual arts program that I implemented at high school offered a perfect opportunity. With a backdrop of drought, I challenged my students to find a platform with which they could engage. Ultimately, I wanted them to make art about water issues that extended beyond the classroom. It is my students who discovered the rich program and contest that the Bow Seat offers. And now, year after year, we participate in the contest. The water droplet necklace that I often wear while I'm teaching is a symbol of the pledge that I've made to educate my own children, but also my students about water issues and global warming and environmental justice. Looking at some of the projects that my students have engaged with as part of the exploration of the Bow Seat themes every year, we usually start off in a visual diary. And this is a document where they write about their creative process, their research. It's really a space for inquiry-based learning, and it shows their areas of interests and investigations. It's a space to explore, experiment, to plan, reflect throughout the production of the art. Radial School, where I taught until the end of 2020, is based in Sandton, so that's far away from the ocean. We had to spend some time researching and internalizing climate change issues. They analyzed artworks so they could understand what climate change issues were about, and they also looked at many of the artworks on the Bow Seat website. And it's really a wonderful resource for students to go and have a look at artworks made by students of a similar age throughout the world. And my students were certainly inspired by that. The Bauseed website is filled with carefully curated educational resources for students and teachers, and it's definitely worth looking into. During lockdown, we had to get a little bit more creative about how we did these visual diaries. And I tried to simulate a studio environment by using software or apps that we could see each other's work. Sometimes they were physical visual diaries documented over here, but also sometimes digital visual diaries as slideshows. These projects were really student-led projects, and they enjoyed going on a journey with these Bauseed themes. They loved the exploration of the theme so much that they decided to then develop a range of biodegradable pencil cases. Let me show you a little bit more about that. So Gabby Carzola produced some visual diary work over here. This is some drawing that she developed to be able to create this sculpture in wax. She then allowed her wax sculpture to melt as a comment on global warming. And this is the pencil case that she developed as a result of this exploration. And you can see that the polar bear structure or skeleton looks like it is in a museum, something of the past, something that we maybe need to protect a little bit more. What I love about this project is that the team of students that I worked with really took ownership of this project. And they sourced a printing company who printed on biodegradable raw material. They wrote press releases. They did Photoshop tutorials. They really went all the way with this campaign and even presented it at our school assembly. Here's some more examples. And if you read the comment here that Gabriella made, her engagement with this Bauseed Ocean Awareness competition allowed us so much experience, creative experience, and also an outlet to explain her ideas about global warming. Some more examples. Visual diary work on the left, the Photoshop artwork in the bottom left, technical experiments on the right-hand side, and then the end product in the middle. The day we received our pencil cases was a beautiful day. I remember the box that came to our studio, and as we opened the box, everyone gathered around, and it felt like a very, very special present that came our way as we unpacked the box with these beautiful pencil cases. This example shows you Joelle's work on the left-hand side in a visual diary, how she translated it into a circular composition in Photoshop, and then how it was printed on her pencil case with two different sides, showing the fish going in the circular motion. This is Max Chetwin's work. I allow my students to explore and experiment. This was quite a radical experiment, let's be honest. He used fish heads collected from our local sushi shop, preserved them. That ugly, stinky part happened at home, and then put together this installation with burnt plastic and the fish heads. The fish heads were then used as inspiration for his pencil case. The students really wanted to extend their work into our community. Our school offered or hosted a very successful arts festival that incorporated visual and performing arts. The visual arts component was titled Project 001, which included an exhibition of student and professional work. We hosted art workshops, and the students sold their biodegradable pencil bags. The students enjoyed selling their pencil bags, and as it acknowledged their creativity, and it was wonderful to hear from them how they presented their own work to their clients and how they passionately spoke about their cause. They really enjoyed selling their pencil cases, and it was a great success. We could actually use the money gathered or gained from that to print another 100 pencil cases. And then they wanted to extend their network. They made contact with the WWF. We visited the offices in Braamfontein. We saw their building, which is a 6-star rated green building. We saw their grey water systems in their building. And they also then presented a workshop to us where my students became ambassadors for SASSI, which is about sustainable fishing in our country. Some more photographs of our exploration with WWF and SASSI. We have completed many projects based on the Bausiet themes. Another project that I really enjoyed was a project with younger students in grade 9. It was an artist activism project where I asked them to produce an artwork in a circular format. We then printed that on stickers, and the idea was then to stick that onto a reusable water bottle and to pledge, as you put the sticker on, that you will no longer use plastic water or single-use plastic water bottles. And it was wonderful to see the campus filled with these bottles with their beautiful stickers all over. And ultimately, it's something that needs to be extended in our community. It would be wonderful if we can allow people to have filtered water in containers like this with the artworks on, rather than single-use plastic bottles at conferences and gatherings at school. Thank you so much. I'm now going to hand over to Sharlé Matthews, who is an artist who will speak about her work.
Hello. Can you hear me? My name is Sharlé Matthews, and I have been involved in art and art education for the past 30 years. I was born in Grahamstown, which is an incredibly dry part of South Africa. And right from word go, I remember having to save water. My dad had a huge veggie garden, fruit and veggie garden, and we literally lived off of our garden. And every bit of water was saved. We had pipes coming from our loos and from our baths onto the grass. We could only flush every now and then. And every last little bit of water was saved. So I literally grew up in a dry area, and as a result, I've always been cognizant of water and saving water. And I just remember, in particular, we had a naartjie tree in our garden, and when it was incredibly dry, the leaves would curl up on themselves in order to not evaporate too much water. And I remember the psychological effect that this had on the entire household, because as the naartjie trees, as the leaves curled in on themselves, we would get more and more panicky about the fact that the water was drying up, and would it become, would we have another rainfall? And I think to always remember that, firstly, water does not come from taps. And we can only save water while there is water to save. So projects like this are absolutely fantastic, because I think we need to all be, we literally need to be brought up with water saving being absolutely natural to us. And I think the first time that I took part in an exhibition that was in particular, particularly about water saving, was when I took part in an exhibition called The Fragile Karoo. And it was basically an anti-fracking, and this is the painting that I did for the exhibition, called A Fractured Earth. And it was basically an anti-fracking exhibition. Now, those of you who don't know, the Karoo is an incredibly dry, arid area of South Africa with a very, very fragile ecosystem. And fracking involves pumping toxic chemicals and fluids under really, really high pressure to about 3 meters underground in order to extract oil and gas. And the problem with this is that huge amount of water is needed to drill down. And chemicals are pumped into the earth, and very often these chemicals can't be removed. And as a result, they filter into water reserves, and they filter into water that might be lying on the surface as well. In this painting, I have got some very polluted, I've got a sort of a shadow, a creeping shadow right at the bottom. That looks like a rather doomful shadow or it could also be polluted water. And I have a setting sun at the back. And the idea is, as the sun sets every day, we very often do not help. We just carry on messing up the earth, messing up fragile ecosystems in many ways. In a lot of my works as well, I have the actual earth I have fractured and I've broken up. Also to show the fact that we destroy so much in order to do things like to get the oil and gas. When we have huge amounts of water, huge amounts of wind that we could use for energy. So this is the painting that I did for fracking, for the fracking exhibition. My other absolute obsession is the sea. So Eric, I agree with you on sorry, not on the sea. Sorry, I've got I've got everything back to front. This is another exhibition that I took part in, and it was on the drought that we had in Cape Town a couple of years ago. And this is a series of works called Where the Waters Were. This one is called Memories, and you get the idea that that the water is shifting, and it's sort of leaving the earth behind. The very grey, barren earth is being left behind. The next slide. This is abandoned. Sorry, these two are complete. This is abandoned harbour. Once again, the idea that the waters are drifting off. The next slide. This is called What Remains, and basically all the water is now gone, and this is the polluted, dry, arid earth that remains. And then right at the end, I have a painting called Glimmer of Hope, and that basically shows that there's a tiny bit of water coming in right at the back. There is the grass is starting to grow, and then right in the front we still have the arid earth that hopefully will be watered, and the grass will grow. Sorry, now onto the sea. I've got things very muddled there. I have eternally been obsessed with the sea, and I live in South Africa, which was colonized many years ago, and I started looking at the sea in terms of, does it divide lands or countries, or does it join them? And I started looking at the question of colonization and the positives and negatives of colonization. And I then started looking very definitely at harbors and the industrialization, the very industrialized harbors right next to the sea, that obviously accept new goods, accept new peoples, accept new cultures into certain lands. The conflict between man-made and city and bodies of water I've always been interested in, and I very often put a moon into my my landscapes that I do of the sea, because a moon is very comforting, it's motherly, and it's very definitely linked with the tides, and it's something that happens every single day. Every night the moon comes up, and it's reassuring, it's rhythm. And I think that very definitely is what we miss out. We're not looking at the rhythm of nature at all. The ocean also produces 70% of our oxygen, and it absorbs carbon dioxide, and very definitely drives the Earth's weather systems. It's an essential source of food, and 10% of our population relies on the sea for commerce. So I've obsessively painted harbors. The more industrial, the better. And once again, right at the bottom, you can see that I have the fractured earth, the sort of broken up earth below, right at the bottom, which seems to crop up in all my works. And then I decided to end off the talk with a slightly, I think very often as artists, we show the doom and destruction, and so with this work, this is one of the very few positive works I've done. relating to water, and it's called Dreaming of the Day, and obviously Dreaming of the Day where we have beautiful clear water, and yeah, everything is it's a sort of happy picture that I wanted to end with. So thank you very much for listening to me and having a look at the work. And I'd now like to introduce Zietske.
Thank you very much, Sharlé. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm a fine artist and I love making sculptures and installations. I finished my studies at Stellenbosch University, where Tashi is now 3 years ago. So the installation I shall be discussing tonight actually represents a lot of firsts for me. It was my first exhibition I had outside of a university context, so that was very exciting. But I suppose more importantly for this discussion is that this was the first work I did that involved exploring or tackling environmental issues. Though with most of my other work, I really love working with natural materials. I think that extends from my childhood, where my siblings and I basically grew up on a farm visiting my grandparents a lot. And we ourselves had a massive backyard with a wooded area. So we climbed trees and made mud holes and leaf heaps. We were outside and in nature constantly. So I guess that is why with this installation, I found my inspiration on a farm outside of Oudtshoorn. I live in Oudtshoorn, which is in the Klein Karoo. Sharlé spoke of the Karoo, so the Klein Karoo forms part of the Greater Karoo and is also a very arid, semi-deserted area. For this exhibition, which we gave the title Kicking Up Dust, myself and 2 other artists from Oudtshoorn came together and we created work that explored our personal experiences with it. Next slide, please. For a year, we did research. We went out, took a lot of walks, a lot of photos and videos, and we interviewed various experts, nature experts, business owners, the fire department, the water department, and of course, farmers. We live here and have, of course, been experiencing the drought, the water restrictions, taking 2-minute showers with a bucket, or watering the lawn with shared bath water. It is so hot in Oudtshoorn that our swimming pool here at home has completely evaporated since 2017, I think, and it's still empty now. And I personally find it a terrible hole to look at. Because just above our empty pool looms this massive, probably very old tree that used to provide most of the shade in our backyard. It was a very beautiful tree. My dad often still talks about remembering the last summer our pool was full, the tree full of leaves and our lawn was green. That was about 4 years ago now. The tree died 2 winters ago and it is still standing, but it would probably have to be chopped down at some point. But the stories I heard from the people we interviewed, everything they showed us and what we ourselves saw on our outings shocked me. I felt ashamed of how little I actually knew about the drought and how it touched the lives, the mood and hope of the people that depended on the land around Oudtshoorn. Oudtshoorn is an agricultural community mainly sustained by the ostrich farms and wildlife ranches around town, and also the tourists that these ranches bring. Everyone suffered during the drought, but my heart went especially out to the farmers of Oudtshoorn. Their farms are not only their homes, but their businesses, their livelihoods. The drought we have been experiencing in Oudtshoorn, like Eric and Marissa explained about the Western Cape, has been the longest recorded drought in decades. And in Oudtshoorn, at the time we were doing our research, it hasn't sufficiently rained for well over 5 years. So you can imagine that the crops were dying and didn't recover and livestock were also lost. Farmers accumulated massive amounts of debt and some would never be able to recover their income. So too farmers lost part of their land or had to sell land that has been in families for generations. There was this one farmer we went back to multiple times. His stories and my physical experience of his land resonated the most with me. A part of the land actually burned down in the time we were doing our research. Next slide, please. So the 1 week we went and the valley was full of reeds and birds. The farmer showed us trees and shrubbery that suffered, that hasn't borne fruit for years, or was very brittle and has actually changed color because of the high amount of salt that was present in the ground because of the drought. He also told us that the little water there was left, the animals could not drink because it was so salty. Tortoises and especially sheep were so desperate that they drank the water anyway, and these animals died. And when they inspected the carcasses, they would find that the animals had severely damaged livers because of the salt in the water and plants. Anyway, so just a week after we went back again and this valley had burned down, it was so quiet. All those birds we heard before, their homes were destroyed. It was a very jarring experience for me. It was also on this farm that the farmer showed us this empty dam that had the biggest impact on me. Next slide, please. The whole bottom was completely covered in salt. I mean, during the drought, we've been seeing a lot of empty dams with the bottoms all in cracks, but this one was something I haven't seen before. It was snow white. From far, it looked either like sea sand or snow, and it smelled like the ocean to me. It was amazing and horrifying at the same time. So salt, for some reason on this land, which felt weird because we are in a semi-desert, had a very strong presence in this captured me. Salt is a preservative, right? So the land was desperately trying to preserve what it could. We went down into the dam and it felt so vast. It was so extremely hot, the way the sun baked and reflected off the waters. This is also where I found the salt fragments that I used in my installation. Next slide, please. It actually used to be the plants that grew underneath the water when the dam was full, and it has completely dried up and salted over. I was mesmerized because first you wonder what these strange fossil-like, creature-like things are until you pick them up and inspect them closely. I love that they looked like fossilized creatures because for my installation, it added themes of preservation and death, exactly the sort of conflict during drought and water scarcity. So this whole experience has highlighted ideas of conflict, emotional turmoil, confusion, what was known to people and what people were oblivious about, what people lived with, how they were trying to survive, and what others would never see or know if we as artists did not show or at least try to tell them about. Next slide, please. So with my installation, I wanted to play with the idea of contrast, juxtaposition, and contradiction. I took elements from nature, the salt and plant pieces, and combined it with man-made elements, the melted perspex and lighting that created the underwater effect, confusion, turmoil, and uncertainty felt. From the people, about nature, and the idea of the environment at large. Here you have the scene that at first glance seems like an underwater scene, but upon closer inspection, the viewer notices the salt pieces that ask them to, because they probably don't understand what it is they are looking at until they read the author's statement. I simultaneously create moments of uncertainty and moments of becoming aware, ultimately to construct the opportunity to readjust to what is learned and felt. Nature was readjusting, and the people inhabiting this environment needed to readjust. The way I see it is that the drought and water scarcity brings about a massive but slow, gradual process of awakening awareness and introspection. So what habits and things taken for granted needed to change. This all has an effect on our relationship with the space, this environment we find ourselves in, how we understand and how we try to make sense of it. So beyond this installation, I wanted to raise the question, how do people adjust? What will we do to try to find balance again? This installation is strange and beautiful, just as the salt pieces from the dam to me. But at what point do we realize how terrifying it actually is, how desperate nature is, and how unaware and complacent we still are? Thank you. Next up, we have Tashi Piprek, who is a sustainability student at Stellenbosch University.
the Northern Cape province is known for its wide open space, mining, cattle and sheep farm. Shadrach Vutate has been raising cattle at Bushveld close to 40 years. The dry conditions and low rainfall in the past 5 is the worst he's ever seen. He's spending $1,000 a week on feeding his cattle because they have nowhere to graze on the parched land.
It's very, very difficult. We've had very little rain since 2017. This year we've had nothing at all. I'm selling my cows because of the drought, and I've saved nothing.
He sells his cattle at a local auction, which is more frequent these days as farmers get rid of livestock that are a drain on their finances. But the market is flooded and livestock prices are low. Another farmer says trying to survive the drought is almost impossible.
If the rains don't come, it puts pressure on us because we can't farm and provide jobs. The knock-on effect is that people don't have money to spend in town. The businesses are suffering because no one is buying anything.
The farming lobby group Agri-SA says at least 60,000 agricultural workers in 3 provinces have lost their jobs. The industry has lost millions of dollars. The government is providing some relief to farmers battling the drought. It's spending $2 million to buy and distribute fodder to farmers to feed their animals. But this is a short-term plan, and many say it's not enough. Water restrictions are being enforced in cities across South Africa. For the first time, it's the water level in the Vaal Dam, which supplies Johannesburg and the capital Pretoria, has fallen to just under half full. That's especially critical because South Africans use 320 litres of water every day. The global average is about 170 litres.
The situation is very serious. However, it is not one that calls for panic. It is under control. The reliable supply of water at an acceptable quantity and quality is essential for the future development of South Africa.
The government is expected to announce new water conservation plans and how it's going to improve supply infrastructure. But the concern to ensure taps don't run dry is clear, with the government calling restrictions on water use the new normal. Famida Miller, Al Jazeera, Northern Cape Province, South Africa.
It's clear from this video that as humans, we really rely on Earth's life-supporting systems, which are all mystically interconnected. Water, as Sharlé said, doesn't come from taps. It actually comes from our ecosystems. And we're a part of these ecosystems. These ecosystems are all intertwined. We call them social ecological systems. And when they're out of balance, we can't thrive. My name is Natasha, and I'm a student of sustainable development, but I'm also an activist. I was drawn to activism initially to fight against gender-based violence when I went to university. It doesn't take much to realize that when you're fighting against gender-based violence, there's a lot of intersectional things to consider. There's so many identities that cross-pollinate, and when you're fighting for women's rights, you're essentially fighting for social justice, and social justice requires climate justice too. Like Eric explained earlier, we have a whole bunch of crises that also play into each other and that are interconnected. These systems, when they're out of balance, they affect each other and they can actually amplify each other too. That means that these crises exacerbate year after year. Farming is a good example of a human impact or a human activity that exacerbates these crises. I hope you can hear me still. We farm because we need to feed a growing population and we have to make profits. But when we farm, we transform ecosystems. When we do this, we contribute to extinction. We pollute the earth, we pollute our water, we create algal blooms downriver in dams and in the ocean, and we essentially disrupt the climate. All of these effects magnify each other, They also cause drought. When we farm in this way, there's no water left in the soil because we till it to plant maize and crops like wheat. When there's no water in the soil, no moisture can evaporate and there's no rain. And so we increase desertification and droughts in our areas. But when we sink water into our soil, it becomes available to us too. Regenerative agriculture is one of these methods where we can really sink water into the soil to make it available to us in the atmosphere. This is my garden on the left here. This was post the extreme drought, but this is fed purely on rainwater, which we only have in the wet season, and we have rainwater tanks. But since the drought, we made a really huge effort to try and improve our soil as much as possible, because a healthy soil can have up to 70% moisture holding capacity. So soil and healthy earth really becomes a sponge for us to protect and hold our water, and then to feed it back into the atmosphere to create rain. Here on the right, I wanted to include a little diagram of a fruit tree guild, which is planted down slope. So water would come down in here and feed into the tree, which has got some medicinal plants growing in it, and it would actually seep into the soil instead of flowing straight off. Drought is intertwined with other wicked problems. And so we really need to take care of our soil if we want to increase our capacity to encourage life. The solutions we have can have magnified impacts too, just as our crises can magnify each other. When we understand how interwoven our social and ecological systems are, it becomes much easier to intervene in some of these crises. The picture in front of you is a picture of the Cape Flats. In South Africa, there were forced removals where families were moved off the lush mountainside, which you can see in the background, onto a pretty uninhabitable sandy area, which is really tough for growing in. As you can see, poverty is a huge issue that exacerbates crime. And one of the ways that we can really address some problems in this area is to feed the soil so that people can at least grow food, people who don't have economic access to buying food from the shops. A small example is us giving a workshop on regenerative agriculture in Bontehill, which is a suburb of the Cape Flats. So this, which is essentially beach sand, was growing crops to feed the local community kitchen, and these farmers were selling to make some profit for themselves. All the technologies we have now are enough to solve these crises. We actually have what it takes to intervene and to solve a lot of these challenges. What is missing is our imagination to apply it. So for example, in Cape Town, a city that was so affected by drought, when it rains, water lands onto our pavements and our tarred roads, and it gets directed into stormwater drains. And that water takes plastic bottles, cigarette butts, and whatever else is lying on the street, what else has been littered, and it actually channels it directly into our rivers and straight into our ocean. So instead of doing that, for example, a solution that really addresses how interwoven our systems are would be to feed water into beds between paved areas. This is an example at Michigan State University. Instead of having stormwater drains on the edges that would channel polluted water straight into the rivers and oceans, you would actually sink the water straight here into the soil. This is really useful because it also replenishes our aquifer. As Marissa explained earlier, when a drought hits, we rely more and more on groundwater and our aquifers, which can also become depleted. Art is really a way to help us understand how interwoven these systems are and the impact that humans can have on our ecological systems that we rely on so heavily. Art can help to motivate us to act too. But it can also help us visualize a future and perhaps an alternative and not just the doom and gloom of it all. It can really perhaps help us reimagine ourselves as stewards of Earth's life-supporting systems.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your stories and experiences with the drought in South Africa. At this time, I see we have a lot of participants. I'd like to open up the floor to anyone who has questions. So you can either raise your hand, use the raise your hand function, or send them in the chat and we can pass them on to our panelists. So, to start us off, I have a question for all of you. I want to know, I was kind of wondering if there's anything that you've seen in your communities that has kind of given you hope throughout all of this, hope for the future of the climate and of water resources and everything.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I think in terms of after the drought in Cape Town, we are so absolutely aware of water and how incredibly precious it is. And I think it starts with really, really young kids. It starts with absolutely everyone. And I think that gave me quite a bit of hope. Everybody was talking about water and everybody was aware of water.
So yeah, it looks like Hannah is asking if there are any ongoing service projects that are taking place in the Western Cape at the moment.
I'm not sure what's meant by service projects.
Actually,
is that like?
Sorry to chip in over here. I think opportunities for young people to contribute to their world by doing service within their community, particularly in the area of drought and water preservation.
Yeah, there's definitely projects happening. I definitely come from more of an agricultural and regenerative agriculture background, so I know what's happening in terms of urban farming and increasing our water holder capacity and refilling our aquifers. And actually, it's really interesting. There's a large community in Cape Town that have all congregated on social media platforms like Facebook and even WhatsApp. And everyone provides assistance to each other for like urban farming projects, how to passively harvest rainwater, how to best filter grey water into the soil and to use it in vegetable gardens. So there's a lot of individual projects like that, and there are also some bigger projects happening, but on a city level, I'm not aware of any plans to start passively harvesting rainwater as a city government.
And then Marissa, I see there's a question for you. About how you keep your students engaged with their visual journals, and how do you teach them to use the journals throughout your course?
Thank you. Thank you, Brianna. I think a visual journal is an important space for people to take chances. So instead of me telling the kids exactly what needs to go in a visual journal, I allow them to explore and experiment. I guess in the beginning of a course, which I really see as a 3-year course, so starting in grade 10 right up to matric, I give them smaller individual tasks to do, like drawing tasks, research tasks, analyses, brainstorm exercises, reflection exercises. But towards the end of their course, towards matric or grade 12, they really need to own their creative process. And by that time, they use different components of this to make up their own individualized creative process. So I have a checklist, and I tell them, okay, well, on the checklist, the things that could go in the visual diary, research and drawing and technical experimentation and like that. And depending on where they are in their own creative journey, which is quite personalized, they can then decide which component goes into the visual diary. I guess it's something scaffolded year after year and project after project. I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you all for answering those questions. I will, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I want to share Zietske's and Tashi's Instagram handles are on the screen here, as well as Bauseat's social media information. We will also be sending out a follow-up email later this week with some more information and resources, so we can include those resources on regenerative agriculture in that email. And as a reminder, there is one more month to submit your art, poetry, writing, performance, film and or multimedia pieces for the contest. This year, the theme is Water Rising, and Bauseat is also granting $750 awards to educators like Marissa, who bring the Ocean Awareness Contest into their classrooms and creatively teach about environmental issues. We hope this webinar has provided some inspiration for you to explore and refine your own connection to water. And thank you to our speakers for donating their time and sharing their stories. And thank you all for tuning in. We hope to see you next time.